I know Ben Twist at Creative Carbon Scotland talks about the transformation from a culture of consumerism to a culture of stewardship, and we are the culture makers. So isn't that our job right now, to make a new culture? And it will take all of us as artists together to do that. It's not enough to do carbon neutral work. We want to do carbon positive work. We want our artwork to be involved with ecological restoration. What does that mean? And so I've been thinking a lot about that. What is theater practice that actually gives back, that makes something more sustainable, that is carbon positive? And I guess that's just a conversation that I'm hoping to have in the future with other theater makers who have that vision.
Another episode of the Conscient podcast. I'm with Kendra Fanconi, who wears many hats, and we will be talking in just a minute. But I always ask the guests to introduce themselves briefly, knowing that there's a link to their website with more information. Mm-hmm. So, Kendra, who are you in a nutshell?
My name is Kendra Fanconi. I'm the artistic director of a theater company called The Only Animal. And The Only Animal makes theater out of a deep engagement with place. And that's meant practically that we've worked in site-specific theater for a long time. But I would say for the last, 15 years or so, I've worked a lot more in wilderness locations with the elements, and that coincided with my movement to the far west coast of Canada, to the Sunshine Coast, which is Sechelt and Squamish territory, traditional and unceded lands, and that's where I'm speaking from today. Other than that, I'm a mom. I'm a partner to an American philosopher who I adore. I'm a farmer, and that goes back in my lineage on my dad's side, for at least 1,000 years. And also a passionate forager. If you were talking to me in the autumn, we would have to be walking in the forest picking mushrooms, or it would be hard to make a schedule to get together.
Well, all these things are connected. I mean, I know you as a theater artist and more recently as an activist on art and climate, and we'll get to that. But I've seen some of your work, and we were together in Banff with about 50 other artists and activists and psychologists and others for a summit that the National Arts Centre pulled together. And so I'm glad that you have a company that's dedicated to art and environment, because there aren't that many in Canada or even the world. And so you're providing leadership both at a sort of action level, but also at a sort of strategic philosophical level. How can one get involved artistically through the environment? Well, you're doing it and have been doing it for many years. So that's great.
I didn't speak to that, but part of the mandate of The Only Animal is that we work for solutionary outcomes for the climate crisis. And I can talk a little bit about the evolution of the company. It's a 16-year-old company, but we kind of started just a zero impact company. The movie Inconvenient Truth had come out, and we were very inspired by that, the core team. I would say as time has gone on and doing the kind of work on site that we do, we've run into the climate emergency. We made Nix, our theater of snow and ice, for the 2010 Olympic Games in the warmest winter in 126 years. And we really felt we were creating in the crisis. And then we were inspired to try to create, to influence it. And that has led into a whole stream of work that more directly addresses the climate crisis. And I'm sure we'll get to that.
Well, yeah, we will. And it's interesting, the wording you use, the climate crisis came to you, but maybe you came to it, but it's inevitable, right? Because it's all around us, and people are waking up to it and being terrified by it. And yes, we will get to that. But I wanted to start because I ask all the guests about the episode reality, but more importantly, the themes that it raises and the responses or reactions that it draws out of people, because it talks about accepting reality and working through grief. So what was your response to some of that content? Journalist Jack Miles. Reality as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. Instead of being the method through which we observe a thing, reality is the nature or truth of this thing.
It's interesting. I started listening to a bunch of conscient podcasts on the weekend, knowing that we would speak, and was very inspired. But I danced around that episode and didn't listen to it. And I think that's a very human experience right now in the Anthropocene. Like, we know it's right there, and it's so scary to take it on. It's easier to listen to people who are engaged in the solutions than it is to grapple with the reality. So it wasn't until when I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning this morning and thought, I haven't listened to Claude's reality podcast. So I listened to it laying in the dark, and kind of going in and out of sleep and thinking about my journey with grief into action. I'm kind of inspired by now in Canada. If you go to the doctor and you complain of climate anxiety or climate grief, they prescribe climate action, and that has definitely been my journey. And even on a daily way, if I come across a fact or something in this work that kind of grabs my heart in an icy clench, I do something, and that really does help me.
Well, the episode I did for therapeutic reasons, really, to work through some of the anxieties I had and to listen to interesting people like Rebecca Solnit and some of the people that I quote, some of whom I know and others I don't, but the importance of storytelling. So we'll get to that, because it's really what I'm trying to explore and work through is how do the arts contribute further to an issue as complex as a climate emergency, because we know they already are, right? Because art is always dealing with social issues and that. But how do we take it to the next step? And maybe I'll put that to you now, because I know you're doing it through your company. But what do you think the role of art should be, and what can artists do that they're not already doing to have a as meaningful an impact as possible?
Boy, I'm really actively trying to understand that right now, Claude. I think so. There's a few things I know, and a few new ideas I'm excited about on this. I feel I work a lot with environmental not-for-profits. David Suzuki Foundation has been a great partner, and a visionary leader there, Sherry Yano, a couple of years ago, said to me, the fact-based approach that we have in communicating with the people who follow us, a lot of people in Canada, fact-based approach is dead. We can't get through to people anymore on that sort of information, with this idea that there's an information deficit, and if only people understood what was going on with the climate crisis, they would act. But what I think is happening instead is when we confront those news articles about biodiversity crisis or the climate crisis or the warming earth or the oceans, or that, I mean, this happens to me. I open that article, I start to read it, I get completely overwhelmed. I put it as a tab in my browser and say, I will come back to that. But I don't have a guide through it. I don't have a path to action. I don't even have just like a warm, loving sense of somebody with me. So I think that really is the role of arts to me. To me, the climate movement is not a struggle. It is the people who come to the climate movement love something. They love a child, and they want a future for that child. They love wild places, sitting by the beach, the ocean, a wild animal species that they see is struggling. Even here, a few years ago, my company noticed that there were no puddles because the water table was so low that year. And I live in a rainforest. So in the spring, for there to be no puddles, it's a sign of the crisis. And and I love puddles. So, like this sense that if you're involved in climate, you're a lover. And so what a great thing to join in with that band of lovers. And I think that the arts, so many of us came to the arts through love because we just love that form, whatever it is, music or acting or painting or whatever it is. And when we appreciate art, it's often the art we love. It's the like Netflix show that we want to binge watch 13 episodes because we just love it. And I think that those things come together. And that when we open up this sort of climate world with art, that we're kind of offering a warm hand to an audience member and saying, I'll go through this with you. A storyteller works with time, and they work with a sort of emotional journey. You don't just abandon someone at the height of the tragedy, at the climax. No, you take them through till resolution. And so often in the climate work, that resolution is action. What's our piece? What can we lift? How do we help? What understanding can we come to? How do we move this thing forward? And so that, I think, is the role of artists in this time. That is what I have understood up till this point. Now maybe my thoughts are beginning to shift to what is more essential in our humanity that we can look at. Not so much the issues, although I work directly on issues like forests and oceans and things like that, but I'm starting to think more just what is that thing in the human spirit that oozes unsustainability, and what is that thing in the human spirit that can make so much beauty and love so much, and how do we communicate that story? How do we address that really delicate balance within us to put us on a path for a more sustainable future?
Dharma teacher Catherine Ingram. Despite having caused so much destruction, it is important to consider the wide spectrum of possibilities that make up human life. Yes, on one end of that spectrum is greed, cruelty, and ignorance. On the other end is kindness, compassion, and wisdom. We are imbued with great creativity, brilliant communication, and extraordinary appreciation of and talent for music and other forms of art. There is no other known creature whose spectrum of consciousness is as wide and varied as our own.
Well, I found that listening and reading stories from very different points of view fills in the gaps. There are patterns, our colleague Anjali Padurai has talked about, the climate crisis being hundreds of years old. It started a long time ago with colonization and exploitation of nature, and we should know that. We should know and own it, that that's what happened in our cultures. And then it's about, she also talks about a northern star, like you talked about a guide. How can the artist be pointed in the right direction by their colleagues, their fellow workers and environment and so on, but also provide the leadership, because artists have this capacity for vision, right? And for nuance and for the aesthetic experience of art, which is hard to categorize. I did an interview yesterday with a filmmaker who asked me, what does art do in climate? And there I was on the spot. And I said, well, there's awareness, there's action, there's vision. And then there's a huge category called intangible. And I don't mean to be evasive. I just say art does what it does. It reaches somewhere in you. It can have a delayed response. A year later, that exhibition all of a sudden starts making sense. But it moves you, your spirit, your emotion, and science does that as well, because science is fascinating, right? It's not just facts, it's discovery, it's exploration. And I know you've been working in a cross-sectoral way between the arts and different sectors. And so that gives me a little bit of hope that the notion not only of intangibility, but unpredictability, we actually don't know. We're sort of anticipating it's not going to go well because the patterns are so poor, but we actually don't know what a tipping point might give in a positive way.
Writer Britt Ray. When a small change in a complex system produces an enormous shift, that new pathway gets reinforced by positive feedback loops, which lock in all that change. That's why tipping points are irreversible. You can't go back to where you were before. A tipping point that flips non-linearly could be the thing that does us in. But it could also be the thing that allows us to heal our broken systems and better sustain ourselves.
How do you deal with that? I mean, it sounds like, because you spend a lot of time with these issues, right? You've chosen to make it the mandate of your artistic company.
An academic named David Maggs, who I've met recently, and as well, and maybe you've interviewed for Conscient.
Yeah.
I didn't see.
It's coming out in a couple of weeks.
Oh, right. Okay, great. What is the art-shaped hole in the climate problem? And I kind of love that. And for a think tank that he and I have just sort of like drawn together, we got to talk intensively. Let's do this think tank thing. One of the things that I had said I would do is bring together case studies of artistic projects in a range of disciplines that I feel have like moved the needle for climate. But it's funny, as I've been pulling them together, I think, well, some of them, maybe no one would say that that's related to climate but me. It just touches me in that place that gives me hope for our species. And in that way, I think all artists that are creating now are already artists of the Anthropocene, that are already opening up that space where what is beautiful and hopeful in humans is in action, and we're sharing that place with each other. Now, I particularly am inspired by artists who are working with the natural world, and so maybe there's like a kind of common thread there. But you might be linked to artists who are working in sound and in different ways with instruments, or so I guess I feel like a great love of art in and of itself. And for me, a lot of the work is about impact strategies. So it's about, how does art enter into the stage where it affects the climate crisis, or affects public opinion, or affects decision makers? That's where I have gotten really excited. It's not necessarily trying to control or program what the art is, although I do with my own, and we can talk about some of those projects. But it's more thinking, can we move art, more art, outside of galleries and theaters where maybe only a very small group of people see it, and into our streets and into the places that we love? Can we bring audiences into old growth forests? Can we bring them onto our beaches? Can we put them in a more intimate, connected love story with the natural world because we want to protect what we love? So maybe that's our job. We're just matchmakers. Or maybe that's just my job, and you might hold another piece, and another artist over there might hold another piece.
Well, I think the idea of stage, we're still in the middle of COVID, and so the digital world has taken a stage, and artists certainly have stepped up and are doing all kinds of work, and some indirectly are doing work about the climate crisis because they're talking about their communities and connecting and values and all that kind of thing. But I also think about how do you amplify the impact of artists whilst keeping the art integral and with integrity in terms of the process, because we'll lose everything if we start manipulating art for purposes that in ways that aren't appropriate for the artist who's creating the work. They have to have that freedom. And one of the episodes that I will have by now published is with Seth Klein, and Seth is leading a movement called the Climate Emergency Unit that you and I and others are collaborating on. And he's quite radical. He says we're in emergency mode. It's like the footing of the Second World War. We need to think about, yes, it's nice to talk about the dystopia, but what about rallying people around action? And I take his message well, and I'm thinking, and I think we all are, how do we then rally as a society around the seriousness of the emergency, right? Because so much is at risk, and sometimes people don't understand, and sometimes they're in denial, and I get it. I have come in and out of denial myself. There's things I can't read either. I just can't. But so that's what I think is interesting, and that artists need to talk about openly, without the territorial barriers. Just where are we going? How can we contribute? Are we walking our own talk? There's lots of conversations like that are taking place that need to take place in a much more sort of comprehensive and extensive way.
Well, I think this is probably the time to talk about the Artist Brigade. So one thing that my company, The Only Animal, is doing and has been doing for the last couple of years is this big project called the Artist Brigade. And the Artist Brigade brings arts and artists to the front lines of the climate movement. And we do that in a number of ways. One thing that we do, or will be doing this fall, is we'll bring together a cohort of 100 artists, and we will go through a period of sort of a lab for increasing our climate literacy, knowledge about the solutions as well as the problems. Because I think a barrier for a lot of artists is they already care. They love the planet, and they are aware of the climate crisis, but they don't feel literate in talking about it. They feel like, oh, maybe scientists should do that. And so let's get in there. Let's give a grounding in basic facts. Let's understand what it is that art does that no one else can do in the climate crisis, and to understand where your own intersection is, because climate is enormous, and it contains, as we know, it's intersectional, and that you can look at areas of climate justice are very relevant, land rights are very relevant, and it's this enormous problem that we all need to find our place around, that it takes all of us to lift something heavy. You got to find your place to grab on. So what is your intersection? And then over the course of 2 years, we'll create a number of field trips that those artists can come with us to places where you can see the climate in crisis. We did this last August at the Dakota Bear Sanctuary, which is an old growth yellow forest, yellow cedar, that is threatened with logging here on the Sunshine Coast. And it's bear den habitat, as well as a place where there's at least 77 culturally modified trees that are pre-contact from the Squamish Nation. And we took a bunch of artists up there on this field trip and allowed them to sort of have an embodied experience of this place, to go inside the bear dens, to eat wild blueberries. You can chew the sap of balsam fir like it's chewing gum, to smell what yellow cedar smells like raw potato, like to make these discoveries of place, and to also hear from elders about the culturally modified trees, about why this land is being logged. You know, up there, a yellow cedar that you can put your arms around is worth $10,000 on the market. And you're in this vast forest, and the trees are large enough that it takes 10 of you to put your arms around them, or 18 of you. So, you know, to have all of these lenses, and then to say to the artist, what is your impulse for what you want to do to help save this place? And then they pitched them, and we commissioned as many of them as we could. So we'll do that over 2 years with that cohort of 100 artists. But it's not fast enough for us to just do that. We also have made the Artist Brigade totally open source. So anyone can make an Artist Brigade project, and they can call it Artist Brigade and use our toolbox. They can make their own toolbox and have it be a different name. But the idea is to grow a revolution with artists coming to climate and taking their place, to make the kind of transformation in culture. I know Ben Twist at Creative Carbon Scotland talks about the transformation from a culture of consumerism to a culture of stewardship, and we are the culture makers. So isn't that our job right now, to make a new culture? And it will take all of us as artists together to do that.
Well, I think you're saying borrow our ideas, use our tools, make it happen everywhere in your own way. You've certainly done it with good partners, so you're having more impact because it's part of a larger environmental organization. Mm-hmm. So I admire that, and I appreciate it, because we do need models. We need people who have tried, because it doesn't always work the first time, and we don't have a lot of time. And yet I keep saying over and over that we can't panic, because if we're panicked, I don't think we'll be as effective as if, you know, I sit every day, you know, just like, serious problem, serious effort. and look at multi-generationally, you know, in reality, there's this story that I tell about a meeting with the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, where a person talks about, you know, it'll take as long to undo what we have as then we did to do it. And then I said, we don't have that kind of time. I said, well, there's no answer to that. These things have been done to the earth. Some say that the earth is so resilient that if we just give it a break, it will bounce back to a certain extent. And I hope that's true if you treat it with kindness. And we haven't been very kind to it. But so there's little bits of hope, but there's also the reality. I use the word reality. That it's unlikely that we'll be able to survive ourselves if we continue the way we're going. And I don't mean to go into doomism. I'm not particularly interested, but I am interested in the truth, the scientific truth, and other types of truth that help us position what we're going to do. You know, I'm 61. I have some time. What's the best use of my time? Right now, it's talking to people like you, because I find that there's a need to understand, to be inspired by those who are doing positive actions, and also those who are like you and like me, like a lot of people, trying to figure it out. So let's figure it out and move forward, hopefully together.
Yeah, I think you know, different models will say different things, but we're on a sort of path for a 4 to 6 degree temperature rise right now, and what any incremental lowering of that is good work. Of course, we'd all like to be able to stay at 1.5 degrees temperature rise, because then we have the best chance of having a livable planet for the future. But the difference between 1.5 and 3.5 degree temperature rise is incredible suffering. So it's good work to do. Even maybe without outcomes, I still feel like it's good work to do. I was telling my writing group the other day that I feel like I'm like have all my 10 fingers in electrical sockets right now in my life. I just feel electrified to do this work. And that's partially, I think I came to theater as a kid because of the feeling in the green room with those other people who just loved what I love.
Mm.
And I have that feeling right now with the companionship I'm finding in this climate art niche. They're just such great people. I just am so inspired by them. And it just makes me feel like my feet are going to lift off the ground and I'm going to helicopter around for a while. And it's super invigorating.
Artist Diego Galafasi. Art is a space where we can ask very difficult questions and explore things in a more open-ended way and not be committed to solutions. Artist Lance Garavi. While individual works of art, however genius, may have value, they won't do the trick. What we need is for all art to be about climate change.
Our theater company has a pretty serious commitment to creating new models for how theater companies work. So, for example, we have a no-fly company. So we're not going to tour our work. We have a buy nothing new sort of idea in our company. So that affects a lot what kinds of materials that we use, how we conduct ourselves. And we have a value for urgency and listening to the science. So it comes up in our board meetings. We look at climate news to just like set the reality that we're creating within here, folks. And I think that kind of revolution, it makes me feel like my values are out loud. For a long time, I just felt like if I didn't tour, I wasn't a serious theater maker or something like that. But all of a sudden, as soon as we made the decision, nope, we're a no-fly company, something just like went like kind of fell into place for me. And the new thing that we're thinking about a lot as a company is it's not enough to do carbon neutral work. We want to do carbon positive work. We want our artwork to be involved with ecological restoration. What does that mean? And so I've been thinking a lot about that. What is theater practice that actually gives back, that makes something more sustainable, that is carbon positive? And I guess that's just a conversation that I'm hoping to have in the future with other theater makers who have that vision.
Well, that's an idea I haven't explored very much. Although just a few days ago, I decided that all of the next season will be about art practice, mostly activists, because that's what we need to hear about, are things that are working or initiatives that are breaking ground, and like you have done, sharing methodologies, sharing experiences. There's a group in Montreal called Ecoseno who are doing a circular economy approach to stage materials. Brilliant, because a lot of that's virgin wood, probably coming from British Columbia and places like that. And why wouldn't you use it over and over again in a very thoughtful, careful way? And audiences will love it. They'll say, I want to share the value of, and we're not just talking about recycling here. We're talking about an entire cyclic approach, a systematic approach to the production. And some will say, well, the artist's footprint is so small. Well, it is and it isn't, right? And it's also symbolic. It's like, it's the gesture, it's the process. So the people in England and Julie's Bicycle have figured that out a long time ago. And right now in Canada, we have tools that are being built, thank God, that are going to help us measure how we're doing. And I think there will be rapid growth of the arts and arts, culture, and climate movement in Canada, and it's already taking place. And so I appreciate that your company is one of those who have, in a public way, created work, created partnerships. And so I encourage people to check out the website, the onlyanimal.ca or .com, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're the onlyanimal.com. And a project maybe to look at is our 1,000-year theater that we're in the research stage for now. And 1,000-year theater is the idea to plant a set out of native plants to this region. that will mature and become in its final form in 1,000 years' time, which is what the climax species here in our forest, that is their lifespan. And I love this idea of planting something that will grow generationally, that will be handed from theater maker to theater maker. And of course, it would be open to the public the whole time, because a theater in its a planted theater in its infancy still has a presence. And so what does it mean to believe 1,000 years in the future? What kind of change does it require of you to enter into that hopeful space? So that's kind of what that project is about, and there's more on our website people can see about that project.
Well, thank you for taking the time, Kendra, for chatting with me today. We will speak again. and you know, I encourage people to look at the National Arts Center did a really great theater cycle over 2 years. There's a really great report with lots of resources there. Your website, and there's the information is available, and some of it's, you know, not so negative. It's like these are positive steps that can be taken to work through the issues. You know.
And if any of your listeners want to join the Artist Brigade, they just go to that page on our website and there's a way to get in touch. And we're actively looking for artists, and with no qualifications about where you have to be geographically in the world, we can find work for you with the Artist Brigade.
Exciting. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Claude. This has been great to chat with you.
Bye-bye.